Given how much money some actors are paid for appearing in movies, you'd think that they would want to make sure their faces are seen as much as possible. Alongside that, many have a vested interest in pushing personal brands too, so it's kind of imperative that everyone knows who's going to be appearing where, when, and for how long. It is their livelihoods we're talking about after all. But some actors clearly also believe in the almighty magic of cinema, and how valuable it can be to a film for there to be handfuls of trinkets, Easter eggs, and hidden secrets that fans will discover and talk about long after the credits roll. In this case, it seems a surprising number of stars are willing to give up a spot on the credits for the sake of playing hide and seek with the audience. I'm Scott from Whatculture.com, and these are 13 famous actors you didn't know were hidden in movies. Number 13, Cameron Diaz, Minority Report. When you're Steven Spielberg, you can pretty much call on anyone you like to be in your movies, and they'll thank you for the opportunity. That's why he was able to get fellow directors Cameron Crowe and Paul Thomas Anderson to appear as train passengers. They appear in a thrilling escape sequence that sees Tom Cruise's John Anderton evade the police. But even more notable is the passenger sitting directly behind Crowe as he reads his newspaper. That blonde head belongs to Cameron Diaz, half of whose face is on screen for a matter of seconds. That's gotta be one of the highest ratios of fame to amount of face shown, at least without counting Dredd. Number 12, Ewan McGregor, Star Wars The Force Awakens. You get no prizes in this game for hiding famous people inside Stormtrooper outfits. Sadly, that has been done to death. No, what is more clever is hiding a number of voice performances in The Force Awakens that nobody noticed for a while after release. This even includes a prequel cameo, despite how fans might have reacted to that particular headline if it had slipped beforehand. J.J. Abrams has always believed in the legacy of those movies though, and during Rey's Force vision he brought back Ewan McGregor as one of the Jedi Masters of the past that she hears urging her on. McGregor's entire part boiled down to just a handful of words, saying, "Rey, these are your first steps," and they were almost entirely obscured. The audio department also stitched together a line from unused Alec Guinness dialogue too, and Frank Oz's Yoda is buried in the mix alongside. Now that is attention to detail. Number 11, George Harrison, Monty Python's Life of Brian. Given that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus at one point, at least in the words of John Lennon, you might have thought they'd be above bit part cameos in quirky British comedies about the not Messiah. But not George Harrison, who showed his appreciation for iconic comedy troupe Monty Python by stepping in to help finance Christian baiting comedy The Life of Brian in 1979, doing so with his own money. So enthusiastic was he about the project, which he set up a production company specifically for, that he also appeared very briefly in an uncredited role in one scene. Blending in perfectly, looking as unassuming as the fourth Beatle always does, look hard enough and you'll be able to pick him out. Number 10, Kurt Russell, Forrest Gump. Kurt Russell has a history with Elvis Presley. His first role was as a young boy who kicked the king in the shin for a quarter in It Happened at the World's Fair, and he'd later play Elvis himself in 1979, and then later still a criminal intent on robbing a convention at a casino dressed as an Elvis impersonator. So when it came time to cast Elvis for a brief blurry appearance in Forrest Gump, Robert Zemeckis turned to the expert to give the character his recognizable voice, and he stole Forrest's leg brace dancing for his own. Granted, you don't actually see him as the part was physically played by Peter Dobson, best known as Ray in The Frighteners, but that is his voice giving Elvis those dulcet southern tones. Number 9, Lucy Lawless, SpiderMan. For even the die-hard Spidey fans amongst us, it's hard to remember Lucy Lawless ever appearing in any Spider-Man movie. But she did, and that movie was the first of Sam Raimi's Tobey Maguire headline trilogy of films. The Xena warrior princess star is in the film for literally 3 seconds. And while her character and her dialogue will be familiar to fans of these movies, most people will be completely unaware of Lawless's presence in the film itself. In the scene where the public are being asked for their thoughts on this new Spider-Man that's now protecting New York City, there is a punk rock girl, as she's listed in the credits, who thinks that the guy with 8 hands sounds kinda hot. That punk rock girl is indeed Lucy Lawless. The obvious connection here is that Sam Raimi was one of the key minds who helped develop and produce Xena Warrior Princess, and that was the series that starred Lawless for 6 seasons. Raimi is famous for constantly using his favorite actors, props, and shooting techniques in as many projects as possible, and this was just another prime example of the filmmaker doing just that. Number 8, Glenn Close, Hook. When critics talk about chameleon-like actors, they tend to bring up the likes of Christian Bale and Gary Oldman, whose physical transformations for roles are notorious and stunningly effective. One performance they invariably overlook, though, is that of Glenn Close in Hook. Close appears as the boombox pirate in Captain Hook's introductory scene, who apparently bet against the captain being able to kidnap Peter's children and bring them back to Neverland, and is punished for doubting him. It's incredible how much some well-placed facial hair and bushy eyebrows can do to make someone look completely unrecognizable. Number 7. Edward Norton, Kingdom of Heaven. Kingdom of Heaven is far from the worst movie you'll ever see, but it never rises above a few smiles and a "yeah, sure, I see what you were going for" type feel. It would have been so much nicer if there was a little more entertainment to match the gloss. What can't be doubted though is the quality of most of the performances, particularly the actor hidden underneath the shiny mask of leper King Baldwin. That actor was Edward Norton, in career-high form, who insisted that he remain uncredited to add to the mystique of the character, and to build up his appearance even more. Luckily, you can recognize Norton from his voice, because this performance really does warrant some considerable praise. Number 6. Brad Pitt and Matt Damon, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Matt Damon has carved out a reputation as something of a legend of film cameos throughout his career, and there doesn't seem to be any role too small for him to willingly take on for effect. Both he and Brad Pitt did just that for their Ocean's 11 franchise buddy George Clooney when he made his directorial debut with Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. They very briefly play contestants on the dating game who are on screen just enough to be recognized, even under some wonderful wigs and facial hair, while the audience no doubt tried to make sense of seeing two global megastars in such tiny roles. Also, because they're clearly stand-up good guys, and as a favor to George Clooney himself, they actually offered to play these roles for free. Number 5. Michael Kane, Dunkirk. As anyone who keeps track of Cillian Murphy's acting projects will be all too aware, Christopher Nolan likes to cast his favorites in as many of his movies as possible. Whether it's down to dependability or good old-fashioned superstition is anyone's guess, but at least it means that they keep getting good work. Nolan even does this when all he's got in terms of spare roles is something incredibly minor like an RAF radio operator left off screen, only heard giving orders over the airwaves to a couple of pilots. And incredibly, Michael Caine was still willing to take this role, as it's his voice that can be heard very briefly right at the start of Dunkirk. Nolan said that he very much wanted to squeeze Michael Caine in here, and the performance was a bit of a nod to his character in Battle of Britain. Number 4. Matt Damon, Deadpool 2. Ryan Reynolds and David Leitch deserve some sort of special Oscar for the cameos that they got in Deadpool 2. From the X-Force members, especially Brad Pitt, to the appearance of the X-Men and then Hugh Jackman and Reynolds himself in the post-credits. But by far the smartest has to be the brief, completely unrecognizable cameo by Matt Damon, who follows his scene-stealing appearance in Thor Ragnarok by playing a redneck who witnesses Cable arriving from the future, alongside Alan Tudyk. He's so heavily made up with prosthetics and hair that spotting him immediately was basically impossible, even with the sneaky hint of him being credited as Dickie Greenleaf, the character that he played in The Talented Mr. Ripley. Number 3. Dan Aykroyd, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom has a number of big-name cameos, with George Lucas, Frank Marshall, Kathleen Kennedy, and Steven Spielberg all showing up in one scene. But the most famous, considering he's more used to front-of-camera work than anything else, was Dan Aykroyd. Sporting slicked back hair, a mustache, and a hilariously poor English accent, the Ghostbusters legend turned up playing Weaver, who helps Indy, Short Round, and Willie with some last-minute transportation from the airfield in Shanghai. The former Ghostbuster has a thing for cameos. As well as appearing in the 2016 remake, he also turned up in full Ghostbusters kit in Casper the Friendly Ghost. Number 2. Harrison Ford, E.T. You can always rely on a Steven Spielberg film to have great cameos. He seems very much to revel in Easter eggs at every opportunity. One of Spielberg's best cameos is also the hardest to spot, as Harrison Ford initially turned up in E.T. for a very brief scene with Elliot. He was to play the headmaster of the boys' school who brings him in to berate him for his drunken behavior in science class. You wouldn't have seen him on screen, making it a good hidden cameo on that front, but the fact that Spielberg chose to cut the scene makes it even more covert. The only place that you can see this scene is on the E.T. Laserdisc box set from the 90s, which is probably harder to find than a fan theory not being used in Rise of Skywalker. Number 1. Bill Murray, Dumb and Dumber 2. Bill Murray's unannounced Zombieland cameo is now the stuff of actual legend, but it was so popular that most film fans going into the movie knew of its existence. No matter how delightful it was to see when the film released, some of us kinda knew it was coming. More fittingly hidden was Murray's turn in the awful Dumb and Dumber 2, in which he plays Ice Pick, the roommate of Jeff Daniels' lovable oaf Harry. He wears a yellow biohazard suit made famous by Breaking Bad and actual scientists, and never actually shows his face, delivering one sarcasm-drenched line. This line is pretty much the only successful bit of comedy in the entire movie, which thankfully is something you can always rely on Bill Murray for.